move from change, I want to talk a little bit about addiction. The models of addiction are pretty much as many as there are in this room, right? So we have, is it genetic, biological, neurochemical? Is it because social learning, somebody has witnessed their dad or their mom drink, continually. They think that becomes a normative behavior. Are there genetic, environmental predisposers? Is there some stressors in the family or early childhood trauma that has led a person to addiction? And by addiction, I know we're focusing mostly on alcohol, but certainly there are other traumas. There are other addictions, certainly sexual addiction and overeating tend to be a little bit more of the sequelae of a developmental trauma and or kind of a twisted sense of what normative behavior is, because of the family situation where abuse is tolerated or allowed. So we have different hypotheses about the causes of addiction. We have the biopsychosocial model. You can see them all over there. And what I want you to start to look at is these are the same change theories that we just talked about. Okay, psychological, biological, behavior, social learning. They inform theories of addiction. So I'm just trying to draw this link so that when you're working with somebody who has an addiction, you can see, okay, I'm going to, do I believe in this model that they've learned to drink? How am I going to treat that? We're going to use a learning theory model then, okay? So then we have kind of the genotype environment, the nature and the nurture interaction. And again, you can see this more clearly, if you want to copy the presentation, we'll shoot that out to you. But my point in this slide is just to show you there is a connection between how we conceptualize change and the theoretical models that underpin addiction. Okay? You guys probably know that personality disorder and addiction comorbidity is quite high. All right? I had to put this in there, 44%. That's low, but because that was the research I was referencing. It tends to be a little bit higher than 44%, probably in the 50s at the low end, up to about 80%. All right? So to me, that means if you are treating an alcoholic only to keep that person sober, you're going to make a dry drunk. All right? That's going to be the end of your treatment. You've got to get into the underlying, the old access to stuff. Okay? Forget the depression. We know they're depressed. Okay? That's not rocket science. What are the personality constructs that have either led to, contribute to, or maintain the behavior? Or interfere, if you're insight-oriented, interfere with clarity, or if you're cognitive, interfere with the ability to use the insight. Goes back to what we talked about with change again. The stuff is kind of all links together. All right? So there's some theories that say, this is interesting. Who chooses opiates? Who chooses alcohol? I love to ask people when, I was working with a fellow who was a sex addict, a drug and alcohol addict, and a gambler. And I said, well, why aren't you overeating? You got the trifecta. What's stopping you from overeating? Just because I wanted to know what was putting the brakes on. And of course, he said to me, because then I would be fat and I couldn't have sex. So I was like, all right. But in his little world, in his little mindset, that was actually, a thought process. But it's always interesting to ask people, just directly, why do you do that? Why that one? You could have chosen, become a smoker. You could have become, a candy addict. Why? What's up with the alcohol? Because at some point you've got to interrupt, the sled, the snow sledding that they're doing. You've got to interrupt it. You just got to throw them a curveball. Say, wow, you chose that. And I like this specific alcohol. Why beer? Don't you like scotch? What about vodka? It's interesting to kind of throw something at them and make them think a little bit about, because they're going to have to then reflect on the behavior. Oh, I choose beer because it's easy to get. And you have a word easy. So then that gives you a therapeutic word to play with. Easy. What's easy? What's not easy in your life? You know, it's just a little strategy. But I think this is interesting. Who chooses opiates? Who chooses alcohol? Who chooses sex? Who chooses gambling? There is a lot of this self-medicating hypothesis kind of reappears in the research and the literature in different forms. Probably a lot of truth to this because it just shows up everywhere. All right, that people are somehow using something other than their own skill set, go back to appraisal, self-efficacy. Somehow the situation they're experiencing, they have appraised, they have decided is too much for them to handle. They can't manage it, so they need to do this instead. They need to self-medicate. And I think the thing I like about this hypothesis is in red, you see all the things we've talked about already. It incorporates biological, disease, social learning, biological, psychological, into the disease process, all right? The drug of choice is often the result of the interaction between what does the psychopharmacology of the substance do to the feelings. So people go up, depending upon how they're feeling, or they go down, depending upon how they're feeling. Okay, so we have to get into kind of the insight-oriented, the feeling, right? But I do think there's a lot that, if you Google this, you're going to see that the self-medicating hypothesis shows up all over the place, sometimes in different language. So let's move to, we go from change to addiction. Now we're going to talk about borderline. Marsha Linehan appealed to the DSM-5 committee to stop calling this borderline and refer to it as emotional dysregulation, which is a lot more respectful and probably a little bit more accurate about what the experience is like. From a DSM-5 perspective, borderline often includes behaviors that are associated with other personality disorders. So you do see elements of narcissism, histrionic behavior, dependent behavior, okay? There is, and this is really a challenge, and you need to look at this one because of the therapy. Again, if you believe in transference as a big part of the change process, go back to psychological insight. If you believe transference is the change agent, then you're going to be involved in an unstable relationship. And for those of us who have worked with folks who have emotional dysregulation, they're the folks who just get up and tell you to go to hell and leave. Or they have a tantrum in your office, or they never show up and you spend all this time calling them and tracking them down and you're worried about your license. You know, if I let them go and God forbid something happens, then what? That's the borderline. All right? Manipulative, dependent, dramatic. I had one ask me if I would take her to the prom. And of course you have to say no. This was when I was much younger. And you have to say no. And it's like, oh God, you know, another defeat in her life, blah, 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 right? Abandonment. That's going to be the theme of the borderline. And then of course we know that substances, alcohol, drugs, can exacerbate both depression and rage because of what it does to the amygdala and to the frontal lobe. I mean, drugs and alcohol are just a mess in the brain, right? They're hitting you deep in the amygdala, and they're also hitting you in the prefrontal cortex.